Hi everyone, it's Lindsay and I'm back today with some embossed resist with watercolor. I'm going to be using a brand new stamp set from Clair Stamps. This is part of the January release. It is called Candy Hearts, and it's got these great two open candy hearts that I'm going to be using. It also has solid ones that are connected that would be great for another technique if you wanted to. But today I'm going to be using the open ones, and I'm inking them up with some VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I'll be stamping them onto a piece of watercolor paper that measures 4 inches by 5¼ inch. Now I have treated this paper with my anti-static bag. I highly suggest you do that. You could also use a dryer sheet. You could use some cornstarch if you don't have your embossing tool. They're just a few dollars though, so it's worth the investment and they last forever. So I'm inking these two stamps up and I'm going to repeatedly stamp them and fill up this entire piece of cardstock. Now I will be black heat embossing these, so I will be using some clear embossing powder over this black pigment ink. Now if you wanted to, you could use a Versamark ink and you could use a black embossing powder. That would work as well. I just prefer to use a clear embossing powder. Black embossing powder tends to be a mess for me, and black embossing powder and I don't get along very well, let's just put it that way. So I like to use my clear embossing powder with my black pigment ink. Now once I had about half of this watercolor paper stamped out, I sprinkled on my embossing powder. I'm not going to heat set it yet. I don't want very much warping, so the less amount of heat setting this gets, the less it will warp. So I just sprinkled on the embossing powder and then I'll keep my fingers away from it so I don't knock any of it off. I'm just twisting and turning these stamps and filling up this watercolor paper. I want some hanging off the edge, some solid, some facing upwards, some down, and because I have these two different stamps that have their shadows on one side or the other, it really allows me to get more of a variation of these hearts, which is just awesome. So there's just a few more that I'm going to stamp in the bottom left-hand corner here just to make sure that it looks cohesive. I didn't want to leave any little spare part open just because it would look off. Now whenever I brought my heat tool to heat emboss these images, I really held it off to the side first and let it warm up. Now if that isn't enough, try bringing it around to the back of your paper to warm up the back of your paper, and then bring it to the front, and that heat embossing paper will melt that much faster. And because you're hitting it from both sides of your paper, there will be less warping as well. It is so cold where I live right now that it just takes a while for my heat gun to get good and hot and for everything to start melting. So it did take a little bit of time, but once I had that all melted out, I went ahead and loaded up several of these sentiments on that stamp set. And there are just a ton of them, so you can really pick and choose. You can do them all the same. You can switch it up like I am, make each one different. So I picked out a few that I really liked, and I'm just going to stamp these right in the center of the hearts with that same VersaFine Onyx Black ink. Now this doesn't take long, and I had these loaded up about 4 to an acrylic block. So I am just flipping it over, switching it around each side to the next, so I really just get the most out of these acrylic blocks, and it doesn't take as much time switching out stamps as often as that. Now you can see I did not stamp my XOXO very well at all on that heart, but I will cover that up. That's something I like to do. If I mess up, I'll either try and find a way to fix it or find a way to cover it up. If I don't have to start over, I don't like to. I don't like to waste supplies. So I will show you how I fix that. Now I sprinkled on some clear embossing powder, and again I'm just going to heat set all these little sentiments inside the heart. Now I've already taken heat to this one time before, so this will be my second round of heating, so I really want to make sure that I am not overheating that area outside the sentiments. You don't want to burn your embossing powder. So I'm just a little bit more careful and a little bit more cautious the second time around. And now comes the fun part, the watercolor resist. So I only have one heart to show you. I do not know what happened to the rest of them. I am so sorry, but I do have one, and I've really slowed it down so you can see what I'm doing here. So I've got my little palette off to the right hand side, and all this is a piece of cardstock that I have laminated, and that's my palette. I went ahead and smushed some picked raspberry. This is the distress ink, and I've smushed that onto my palette, added some water, and then I'm just going to take my brush and color over this heart. Now the great thing about heat embossing this beforehand is you have a well that's going to hold in that color. So I can get a little messy, I can get a little crazy, a little quick, and my watercolor isn't going to go outside those lines. It's going to stay in there. It creates a well, so it keeps it all in those lines. Not only that, but it won't cover up any of your sentiment. Your sentiment will also resist that watercolor, so it's not going to create any hazing or anything like that. Here you can see the final result of all the watercolored images. But you can see that all of my colors were kept contained inside those hearts, and also all of my sentiments inside the hearts are nice and vibrant and black still. There is no hazing, no color contamination, nothing. So for my sentiment on this card, I'm going to be using the I Love You sentiment from the Dino Love stamp set. It's brand new from Clair stamps also. But I wanted to use this sentiment. I think it goes perfectly with this card. So I stamped it with black dye ink onto a strip of white cardstock. I've also cut a strip of vellum and also a thicker strip of black cardstock. And I cut little banner ends on the end of them just at an angle. No fishtail banners this time. But I'm just going to apply those right over the top where I messed up that XOXO sentiment. And that's going to be my way to fix that mistake. As always, if you can find a way to fix it before you toss it, I really suggest doing that. You waste so many less supplies that way. So I stuck those down with some double-sided adhesive, just layered them up, and then I used my scissors to trim that flush with the watercolor paper. The only thing left to do was to put some fun foam and double-sided adhesive on the back of this watercolor panel, and then I'll pop it up onto an A2 top folding white card base. Now because this is watercolor paper and I did add some heat to this, I used a little bit of extra adhesive on this just to keep it nice and straight, because there is going to be a little bit of warping no matter how careful you are. So I'll pop that right into the center of the card base, and that finishes the card off for today. I hope you all enjoyed this technique, and as always, I will leave you with a few pictures. For more information and the supply list, you can head over to my blog or the Clair Stamps blog. I will leave both links in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for watching today, and happy crafting!